Good morning and welcome to another BTCC Roundup show here, which you can find on the BTCC app. So make sure you download it. But I'm joined by our special guest, Marcus Simmons, who's Deputy Editor of Autosport, but also has a special responsibility for reporting on the British touring car round. So it's good to see you, Marcus. And also we've got Matt Salisbury from inside BTCC and reporting from all the races for the BTCC app. So Marcus gets all the insider knowledge sometimes when you really give them a good dig, Mark, and that as well. But no, thanks very much for joining us. So we're here to have a chat, talk about British touring cars, talk about Alton Park, which was we sort of thought what we thought it was, which it might have ended up in a bit of a crash fest, which it did a little bit in the end. But that's in some ways I think that's Alton Park a little bit. But then also we'll look forward a little bit to when we're going out to Croft, which again is a really challenging old school circuit, a little bit like Alton Park as well. So it should be good. But first of all, let's have a chat with you, Marcus, because we've known each other a long time. I think I was one of your first ever interviews when you joined Autosport. I think we should have been back 89, 90 or something like that. And it's come full reverse. I'm interviewing you now 30 years later. But not that we need to talk about 30 years later, because that tells everybody how old we are. But how did you get involved in motorsport? What was your in?
Well, my in was, and you're right, I think you were the very first person I interviewed as a staff member.
You started very lowly then. You started with an easy one, no challenges.
Yeah, and I think you'd won the multi-sports championship in '89, and you were stepping up to Formula Forward, which some of the older people might remember that, but famous for breaking the legs of most people who ever raced them.
Luckily, mine are quite bendy, so it was all right. I didn't ever break mine, so it's fine. Yeah.
So how did I get into it? I mean, I was just the most avid of fans as a child, and I had a very indulgent father. He used to take me to tracks as often as he possibly could, I was also, like most kids who are into racing, I thought, I want to be a racing driver when I grow up. But as I got a bit older, it sort of dawned on me that you needed quite a bit of money to do this, and that was money that my family didn't have.
And it's not getting any cheaper either, is it? It's definitely not getting any cheaper.
It hasn't, no. And as an avid fan, I was getting Autosport every week, which my dad would bring home every Thursday, having popped out at lunchtime from work to buy it. And I was very good at storytelling in English classes at school, writing stories, and it dawned on me, why not combine the passion for racing with my ability to write? And so from the age of around 13 or 14, I thought, I want to be a motor racing journalist, and really it was a spec phone call to Motoring News, which we'd also started getting in the 80s, in 1986, to just see whether they needed anybody to cover club events, and they said, well, we do. We need someone to do Silverstone this weekend. Are you up for it?
Oh, really? Right. Okay. Well, that's how a lot of it works like that. I mean, I have lots of stuff that I've ever done, like the F1 TV stuff. That was literally somebody phoned me up. A friend of mine, Chris Goodwin, was doing interviewing in the pit lane, and then suddenly they needed somebody else, and they said, right, can you come out? You're on a plane from Biggin Hill on Thursday morning. I went, yeah, okay. Yeah. I was in and out for that year a few times, but then just carried on, and however many years later, 25 years later, I'm still doing it. So yeah, no, the best thing I've always found is to try and say yes. Yeah. If you can say yes, you'll be surprised how many more doors open for you.
And you'll be surprised what you can actually do if you say,
yeah, exactly.
How am I going to make this happen? But yeah, so that was 86. The morning that Motoring News came out that week with my first ever report in it was the morning where I was doing one of my A-levels. So I remember the massive excitement of dashing out to the news agents and getting it, and then being brought down to earth with my A-levels. But and then I went to in '87, because we were in the suburbs of London when I was growing up, so the office,
Yeah.
Motoring News, wasn't too far away, and I asked them if I could do some work experience in the summer holidays in '87, and they said, yeah, come in for a couple of weeks. So I got to know all the guys. We'd go down the pub at lunchtime, and I just sort of got a good relationship with them. And then it came to the point, so I was doing my degree by this point. I wasn't going to graduate until summer of '89, and David Tremaine, who was the editor at the time, said, after you graduate, the first job that comes up can be yours. So there I was, finishing my degree, knowing exactly what I was doing, unlike 99.9% of the other people.
Well, exactly. Well, just going quickly on that, because obviously, and all that time you've been in journalism, a big history in single seaters, and we were going to sort of have a quick talk about that later on. But one thing I'm actually quite interested in is the difference in journalism in general, but also motorsport journalism, which is in effect like your big days are sort of Sunday. Well, you used to Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday to get the mag out and things like that, which is obviously still the case. But obviously now the internet sort of changed that, because my Thursdays when I was at school were a complete waste of time. I might as well have just stayed at home, because all I was doing was reading Autosport under the desk during all my lessons. So it's, I can blame that for my maths and, well, most of my O-levels, to be honest. But it has changed, because obviously now it's just a constant stream of information.
Yeah. Well, and as you say, I was the same. I was reading avidly on the Thursday, because you literally didn't know what had happened anywhere in the world of motorsport at the weekend until the mags came out.
Exactly. But people won't understand that. If you said to somebody, "What, you didn't know?" But literally, straight away. You can just click on a website somewhere, and you'll have a timing page of exactly what's happening in Vallelunga on the international Italian Formula 4 Championship or something. There's always information out there. Whereas now, you couldn't even get Formula 2 results and things like that. Maybe Formula 1, you could go on teletext and things like that, but nothing else. There was nothing else that you could find.
Yeah, no, it's a massive change, and it's it's clearly been detrimental to the print industry. Everybody knows that, but we carry on, and as long as we're doing okay, which we are, we carry on producing a magazine. But obviously, a media company these days is far more wide ranging. So we have autosport.com. We have we do podcasts, and we do videos and all that kind of thing. So it's but your job as a journalist really changes. So pre-internet, if I'd been writing a BTCC report from Alton Park to a week and a half ago now, it would have been very much what happened. Because people reading it wouldn't have known what had happened. And also, you have to remember that BTCC in the 90s, before internet became really prevalent, it was 1 week delayed, wasn't it? The old coverage and
well, that's big, because people say, oh, it's fantastic in the 90s, but you and I both saw British, and sometimes we've all seen the hits and the highlights, but the thing is, the TV coverage was an edited package from, which I've mentioned before, a week later with Murray Walker on it, which you could make look absolutely fantastic, even from the dullest race in the world, because every car had cameras everywhere and all that sort of stuff, which I actually think would be great if British touring cars had another 50 grand to spend every weekend to put cameras in everything and extra cameras on circuit. That would be one thing I'd love to see in the series. But budgets aren't always there. But the thing is, they weren't always interesting races. But now people wouldn't put up with having to wait a week to see the TV, and that is a massive thing for the token package, is that you have these 9 hours of TV coverage, which doesn't happen anywhere else in the world, I think, with any race.
Yeah, I know, and the funny thing is, because I covered BTCC in the late 90s, in the last few years of the Super Touring era, and because you didn't get TV coverage until a week after the event, and there was no live footage, no CCTV or anything like that. So, say, for example, there was an incident between David Leslie, Tim Harvey and Rickard Rydell or something, I could only find out what had happened by going to speak to all of them. And then you draw your own conclusions from what they all said, and then you'd report it a certain way in your write-up in the magazine. And then you'd see the TV footage the week after. And actually, I've got to say, most of the time I'd watch that and think, yeah, I've got it right. but
It's always handy. I always find when I have to go up to the bus with a driver,
yeah.
I get them to say, right, tell me honestly what you think happened, because obviously they're going to have TV, because they've got all the in-car cameras, they can go through everything. I've got to say 90% of the time it doesn't quite come out. When you only hear one side of the argument, you actually don't get the whole argument. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I can see your problem there. Trying to ask if they were at fault, you'd probably find most drivers it's rare to find one who thinks they're at fault. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But it's quite refreshing when you do get one who just think it's their fault. Which is quite good. I mean, it was really nice last weekend, because I worked at the race weekends. I worked as team manager for Jake Hill, and I have to say I was really mistakes happen, and there was the incident with Jake Hill and Tom Chilton in qualifying, but Tom, literally before Jake had even come back in the pits, he was down at our garage to apologise, and I took my hat. I just said, fair enough. That's, everybody makes mistakes. And then weirdly, I was looking through some stuff from Formula One, and then I saw that Schumacher did the same to Marcel Albers, something like that, in Formula One years and years ago. Came out the pit and just turned left onto him. Yeah. So even the best drivers in the world make these errors, and that's what I said to everybody in the pit. It just happens. It's what it is. But fair play to Tom for saying that, really. But then while we're there talking about Alton Park and the season so far, I mean, really, the man who's really stood out for me, two guys really, Tom Ingram and obviously Josh Cook, who's really not under the radar, but he's quite understated, I think, and he's just done a fantastic job. And he's in a very strong position, because success ballast now isn't working as heavily as it used to. So actually, it's not like you're ahead of the peloton and you're going to get sucked back into it quite so easily. But what do you think about that? Who are your standout drivers for the year so far?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you, really. I mean, I think the funny thing is Josh Cook is one of the people who's most sceptical about the hybrid penalties instead of success ballast, because his argument is that BTC Racing got the Honda working comparatively better with weight than other front wheel drive teams. So they were a little bit sad to see it go, but they've they have done a really, really good job this season. And you're right about Josh. He's understated. I mean, compare him with Tom. You don't have Josh Cook merchandise stalls at race circuits, do you? And I'm not knocking Tom at all, because he's brilliant. He's super helpful. One of the most articulate and interesting guys in the paddock. But he works very, very hard at being Tom Ingram, doesn't he? And that all goes into it. Josh is a bit more, he's got his very successful engineering company that does lots of under the radar projects in motorsport and on road cars, etc. So we are looking at two sort of fairly chalk and cheese characters, but both of them have been driving really well this season, and it's been quite interesting that we've seen over the last 3 weekends, Brands, Thruxton and Alton, we've seen one person pretty much dominant until the reverse grid race, haven't we? With Josh at the first two, and then Tom at Alton.
Yes, that's right. I mean, one drive, and again, I keep forgetting, because he's sort of under the radar a little bit, but doing a fantastic job in a new car with a new team is Ash Sutton. Again, he's really racking the points up without actually being sort of the star performer, which he has been before. He's had lots of years where he's started the season really badly and then come back through, which is where the success ballast will really help somebody if they had a bad start. A little bit like Dan Camish, a little bit. He's had a couple of bad meetings, but because the way he comes to the next race not far off being on a level playing field, really. So it's quite interesting, really, to see exactly what's happening.
Ash has been rescuing some really good weekends.
Unbelievable.
That Ford has never been the quickest package on a weekend, has it?
No, exactly.
Probably a considerable distance from it, actually. With bearing in mind the form of the BTC Honda and the Accelera Hyundai last couple of times, and we're forgetting the West Surrey BMWs the first couple of weekends.
Yes, which could have had more points as well. I mean, there were lots of points left on the table there from all three cars really.
Yeah.
But just Matt, have you got anything looking back at Alton Park that sort of stands out with any other drivers we've been talking about?
I mean, not necessarily in terms of those ones. The obvious one was Tom Ingram getting his first win at Alton Park and the first for Hyundai, but we kind of discussed that at the time at the weekend. But I think Ash Sutton, as you're discussing there, is a really interesting character so far this season because, you know, he's now got a podium finish in half of the races this season, which is quite a strong record when you consider that it is a new car and when you consider that it's been quite a few years since he was in front wheel drive. And he admits when you talk to him that he's still getting to terms with the car. His engineering team are still getting used to the car. You know, they've got to work out how to get the best out of the package for him as well. And I think that for him to be consistently scoring points that he has been scoring in these first few rounds and to be so close to the front without getting a win is a bit of an ominous sign for the others who were in contention for the title. And I think that it's not going to be long until we see him getting that first win of the season in the car. You'd maybe look at it and say, is he the first driver really since Matt Jackson who can get the best out of that package? Because if you look at the focus through the years, Matt Jackson had a fantastic record in it, but we've had others in it who've shown flashes of speed. You know, Andrew Jordan did, Rory Butcher has, Jake Hill has, but there was only really Matt Jackson who was consistently a front runner in the focus. And obviously Ash has fitted in quite well there. We've seen glimpses of speed from Dan in the other car as well, but you'd look at Ash and say if he maintains this, even if he doesn't get a win, he could still be a championship contender in that car, a bit like Colin won it a few years ago with just a single victory.
Yeah, it's definitely the first, because you said about Matt Jackson, who I think is a great driver. And I mean, was a team boss then with my own team, I always, you know, was a bit dubious because they just seemed, the motorbase seemed to be inconsistent. Let's put it that way. It was an inconsistent, because sometimes Matt would be on, you know, I mean, he didn't like qualifying, in fairness, Matt Jackson. His qualifying wasn't his thing, really, but he used to race unbelievably well, which is obviously the most important thing in British touring cars. To get the results, you've got to race well. You can be as quick as you like, but if you haven't got the spatial awareness and the nous to get past and through the field without being taken off, then you end up in the gravel, really, and then you don't score any points. But it's, yeah, no, definitely, I would say, actually, that's a good point, really. I think this is the first time we've seen because even last year, which was a step up, I think, with Jake and getting results in the focus, it wasn't consistent. Sometimes, you know, the qualifying wasn't as good as it should have been, and that throws you completely out. So yeah, you're completely right. Ash and his sort of engineering team are getting much more consistent results than we've ever seen there.
And I think that consistency is more important than ever this year, because as you've touched on already with the weight, you know, previously, Tom Ingram's someone who would have said this in the past. You know, you'd go into a race weekend and you'd think, right, if I can get a good result in race 1 and 2, minimise my losses with the weight, then that's all right. It was very hard to go into a race weekend and come out of it thinking, that's been a brilliant weekend. Even, you know, a great weekend with 2 wins, you might end up leaving Snetterton or leaving Croft or leaving Knockhill thinking, I've won the first 2 races, but I've had a load of weight in the car, I've had the option tyre, and I've been 12th in race 3. So that's a bit of a rubbish end. So it'd be an okay weekend, but it wouldn't be a good one. Now with the change to the hybrid system, it's, you know, there's more chance of having what drivers would class as being a good weekend, but you need to be having them all year. You can't afford to be having the peaks and troughs that Motorbase have had in the past if Ash wants to fight for the championship. So that consistency for him, in just the same way that it's going to be important for Josh and for Tom and Colin Turkington, consistency is more important than ever, I think, this year.
So, and also Marcus, what do you I mean, it's success ballast. It is one of these things that if you read on the internet, you know, people either they don't have an opinion on it or they hate it. It's usually the case with it, isn't it? It's one of those things. I personally, if it makes the racing more exciting, that's great. You know, the British touring cars is there to be more exciting, you know, and provide entertainment. Whether anybody likes that or not, it doesn't really matter. You know, and it definitely provides entertainment. You can't deny that. So if we're looking, then what do you think about it? Do you think it should be, you know, as fair as anything, and everybody should be equal, and you just go into each race, you know, like, you know, Formula One, where you have somebody disappearing off up the road every now and again?
I mean, I'd probably count myself as a purist, and I'd prefer to get rid of it's not success ballast anymore, but the hybrid boost penalties.
Similar thing, yeah. But what I like about this is the driver can have a lot more input in this rather than just carrying a massive bag of sand around in his seat.
Yeah, But yeah, so I'd like to get rid of that. I'd like to get rid of reverse grids. I'd like to get rid of start beast limitations on rear wheel drive cars. I'm in that camp, if you like. But on the other hand, I have to have an element of pragmatism, if you like, knowing that it's the job of the championship to attract as many competitors as they can, and actually, going back to our early days in the sport, Shaun, if you remember British touring cars back then, it was in 4 classes, and every single car in the top class was an RS 500 Sierra. So, and
well, then you used to have like a Mini Metro or a Toyota Corolla win it overall, but they won Class C and they only had 3 cars in it, and it's all just I do laugh when people, and I read stuff on the, and that, again, go back to the internet again, you just read on the internet, everybody's got an opinion nowadays. Before, you were lucky to even get a journalist's opinion because you couldn't find where they were writing anything. Well, you could, but you had to wait a week for it. Whereas now, everybody's got opinion immediately. Within 10 seconds of every incident on circuit, there's an opinion on the internet about it.
Yeah. So
it's a term about internet opinions and people, but I can't say it as there's children probably listening. But it's everybody's got an opinion. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and we don't want to go back to in my ideal world of purism, everyone would gravitate to the same car, and then that would just be boring. Exactly. And we probably have a field of about 14 or 15, which obviously wouldn't be great. So hybrid boost against success ballast. I prefer the hybrid because success ballast to me was too much of a handicap, especially when they upped it for 2021, so that it was 75-66 for the top 2 rather than 60-54. Yeah, and we saw people like Jake in the Ford Focus and Tom in the Hyundai qualifying 20-something when they were second in the championship. And to me, that was a step too far. I much prefer the boost limitation, meaning that you're going to qualify 5th or 6th or something. So you've been given a bit of a handicap, but not so much that you're completely out of contention, and you can actually win that back pretty quickly rather than wait for the reverse grid race at the end of the day, which you always needed the luck of the draw for anyway. But yeah, so I think if we must have artificial sporting regulations like that, I think the ones we've got are pretty decent at the moment.
Yeah, but it allows the drivers to have some advantage, some input into how that gets implemented, which then I think actually that's the best of both worlds. You've got a disadvantage, but the driver can help make up that both 2 drivers with the same disadvantage will use it differently, and it will be better. I personally am becoming a little bit of a fan of hybrid when I wasn't at all to start with. But there we are. That's the joys of not running a racing team, really, I think. But one driver specific. Also we've got quickly the team dynamics. Alton Park seemed to be a little bit more competitive. Seems to be a circuit the car goes well at, and the team runs well at. But Gordon picked up quite a few points. Dan would have picked up a few, but then had a couple of issues where I think he was taken out at one point or other, at some point or other. But they seem to be a team that, again, slightly under the radar, but again, have got potential to get right up there now.
Yeah, they've made. They're always there or thereabouts, aren't they? It's quite interesting. I think that there's no question that the number 1 Honda at the moment is Josh Cook in the BTC car. He's just driving it brilliantly. It seems to be responding well to anything they do to it, setup wise. So an interesting scenario there where the customer team, if you like, has made it work, because obviously those cars were built by Dynamics.
Yeah. But before go on. Yeah, carry on, Marcus.
No, both Gordon and Dan are fully capable of winning races when things go their way, aren't they?
No, exactly.
And I'm sure they will do pretty soon. This time last year we already had a win for Dan, didn't we? We had to wait a bit longer for Gordon, but we shouldn't forget that he was right up there in the championship. Gordon Shedden the first couple of weekends. It's just slipped back a bit, but he could easily get back in there, couldn't he?
No, exactly. I mean, so before we go on to Crofts coming up at the weekend, which is, there's always been said it's a rear-wheel drive circuit. Well, everybody always says it's a rear-wheel drive circuit at Alton Park as well, but we didn't see quite so much of that. But one driver who, I've spent, obviously working alongside in the garage is Stephen Jelly, who you'll obviously know from single-seaters and obviously touring cars for a while. He's such a lovely guy, Stephen. He's actually, but it's like, again, slightly under the radar, but, you should have seen how excited he was when he got pulled out of the hat for pole position. He was leaping around in the truck in the back of the garage. It was, but that's great. I love it when people show like some real oomph rather than just going, oh well, we've got the reverse grid, blah blah blah. And I was really pleased he managed to do the job, because a couple of times he's had some really nice reverse grid pullouts. He's got good pace. But then not been able to hold it up in the race. So now Stetson last year was a good example, which I thought he would win that one. But I was really pleased for him to see it. But it shows the level of driving, because Stephen's raced, GP2, before, won British touring car races, back in the day, 2008, 2009. It's interesting to see the depth of talent that's on the grid. When you have to look at Stephen. He's not the first name that everybody would talk about in British touring cars, but massively experienced and quick.
Yeah, and you have to. You've mentioned his past. He won. He was a race winner in the British Formula 3 Championship when it was proper British Formula 3, as in old school. I think it might have been the year Marco Asma won the championship. But yeah, what an absolutely lovely guy. I first got to know him actually when he was doing the Carrera Cup on the Toka support package, when he'd dropped out of the BTCC. And yeah, he's one of the nicest guys around with a competition license, isn't he?
No, I definitely agree. Great family as well. They're really good fun.
Yeah, he is outrageously lucky with reverse grids, isn't he?
I did say, I think, well, the best thing for the championship would actually if P12 got picked out here, so it's stuck, everybody a bit further back in the, like, your Ingrams and things like that, a bit further back. And miraculously, P12 came out, but I know it always seems to work that way. Well, I think we only remember the ones that do get drawn out that way. Let's put it that way, which is probably more likely. But then while we're talking about single-seaters, obviously a lot of your background was reporting on, international Formula 3 races and all the sort of the young guns, I suppose, who've gone on to Formula 1. You were reporting on them. So now, obviously, on the Toka package, we've got the Formula 4 series. I always get a little bit confused of how many series there are all over the place. But it seems to be a good breeding ground of young talent coming through.
Yeah, and you've alluded to. So I covered European Formula 3 for most of the last decade. So I got to know more than half the current F1 grid quite well. When they're doing that, and their families and everybody, and that was fantastic. Everybody just looks back on that as a golden era, even though it only finished about 4 years ago. The Formula 4, Formula 4 overall has been a massive success, I think. Launched by the FIA 8 years ago, and the British Championship. The British Championship has sort of been never as strong as the Italian and German championships, if you look at it in a European context, and they've switched to the same Tatus chassis and Abarth engine as the Italian and German championships use this year, and it's still not as strong. That's if we've got
there's quite a few cars. How many? What were the teams?
We've got grids of about it's 16, isn't it? It's generally 16. The Italian championship is on 35, 36.
Blimey, right, okay.
Phenomenal. And I think that's just a legacy of the way the industry has gone recently. Because people who have any knowledge of karting, and I have very little, know that the karting industry is pretty much Italian based, and WSK, who promote international karting, also promote the Italian F4 Championship and the Formula Regional European Championship.
Okay, so it's quite a good feeder. That's the connection,
they've got that ladder. The UK has been sort of frozen out a bit. German Championship as well has dropped off massively in the last couple of years and sort of relies on people from the Italian Championship coming over and and doing the German rounds as well. So the Italians have really got the strength in the junior single seater market at the moment. But I mean, Alex Dunn is a good comparison. So you'll normally, a non-reverse grid F4 race, you'll normally expect him to win it in Britain, won't you? I don't know the exact number of wins he's had this year. He's not won all of them, and he's not the only good driver in that championship. But he's also doing the Italian, and he has been a winner in that this year, but he could be anywhere in the top 10.
Yeah.
So you've got that massive strength in depth in the Italian series. The British, what I was a little bit disappointed in was we had the last race of the Thruxton weekend, and it was a 20-minute race, and at the end of it, the top 6 were covered by half a minute. And I thought, oh, you wouldn't have got that in the old days of RAC Formula Ford in the 80s, would you, Shaun?
There would have been a massive slipstream. You'd probably be out of 20 cars trying to take the win. But it's I mean, old days of Formula Ford, I love it. And the first time I ever drove a Formula Ford was last year at the festival, and I did go, why haven't I done this before? Because it's really good fun. But just so that's great to hear about that, and it's nice to see the young drivers coming through. You know, because some of those do end up coming towards British touring cars. But looking forward to Croft now, Matt. And what sort of stats have you got for us for Croft to let us know what we can be expecting from those tight confines and tight hairpins, but also quite fast sections as well?
Yeah, well, we all know which driver we need to be looking out for this weekend at Croft, because we've got, of course, the King of Croft, Colin Turkington, has way more wins than anyone else, and hopefully he'll be able to go for a good result this weekend, which would be a great way to repay West Surrey Racing for the hard work that's been going into getting him a car ready for this weekend. I guess we could say the same about Accelerate with Dan Lloyd. Hopefully he'd be able to have a good run as well. But
those I know that the West Surrey car, initially they thought there wasn't going to be any chassis damage until they got it back to the garage and had a proper look, and then Willie Paul from WPMS, who does all the chassis work for some of the teams on the grid, but West Surrey in particular, that there was a fair bit of work, and they were already stripping that down. Literally within an hour of the end of the race, they were already starting to strip the car down, and Steve Buckle, the team manager, was getting in there, and I'm sure it's the same with Accelerate with Dan Lloyd's car as well. So hopefully we'll see both of them out, and they're both really no long-lasting damage. It was quite a heavy hit, that one, really. But Croft could see maybe a slight changing of the order, but as we've seen, we keep thinking tracks are rear-wheel drive circuits, and they end up not being quite so much anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you never really know what's going to happen on a weekend, do you, at the moment? Like you said, I think we saw strong race pace from the rear-wheel drive cars at Oulton Park. We maybe just didn't see the pace in qualifying. So will it be the same at Croft this weekend? We'll have to wait and see. There are a few landmarks that we need to look out for this weekend, a few drivers who are hitting big numbers in their career. So they all come in the first race of the weekend. Nick Hamilton and Sam Osborne, they'll both be taking the start for the 100th time in the BTCC. Yeah. Tom Ingram will also hit a landmark. He'll start race number 250 in the first race of the weekend. So a bit like Aidan Moffat at Oulton Park, when we were like, God, how Aidan's suddenly done 250 starts. It's a bit like the same for Tom. I mean, he's been around for a few years now, but you still look at him very much as being a young driver. And a few landmarks from chassis points of view or car points of view. Tom's old car, the Toyota Corolla, that will be starting its 100th race this weekend with Speedworks. That's the car that Ricky Collard's driving, because obviously Rory Butcher's car was a new chassis, so that's not done quite as many. And then championship leader Josh Cook, the FK8 will be doing its 100th start with BTC Racing this weekend as well. So a few little landmarks that you can look out for and see how the drivers get on in those races.
No, brilliant. I mean, looking forward, Marcus, what are your thoughts about Croft and how it's going to suit the new regulations and some of the new drivers coming through?
Well, it's a long way. I think it's potentially going to be somewhere where we see the new hybrid penalties making the drivers much happier than the old success weight. Because obviously you've got that very, very slow acceleration out of the hairpin onto a reasonably long start-finish straight that was absolutely crucifying people with ballast before. we've already touched on this, but Croft is supposed to be a rear-wheel drive circuit, but as it's been pointed out, so is Alton Park, and we didn't really see that in qualifying there. So I'm finding the whole thing extremely perplexing and confusing and difficult to call. So
I'm sure that's exactly what Alan Gow was attempting to happen. So he's been very successful.
Yeah, and you have to really. I know everybody grumbles about their car should have more of a brake under Regulation A or Regulation B or whatever, but you have to really give the technical team and Peter Riches and all those guys credit for pretty much equalising rear and front wheel drive, saloon car shapes, hatchbacks, fastbacks. It's just phenomenal, really. And we're going to a weekend where, as we said 2 or 3 years ago, we'd have expected Colin Turkington to walk qualifying and then cruise to victory in race 1 and race 2, and then Stephen Jelly probably get reverse grid pole and win race 3.
Yeah, exactly.
but we just can't predict. We just can't predict what's going to happen now. And
I think Peter Rich's job is probably quite unenviable, and I think you've got to have quite a thick skin, which I know Peter has. He doesn't really mind calling anybody out when they start coming down and moaning about their car, because the first thing they ever talk about is boost, is what they usually always talk about. But actually, they're never usually talking about the nut behind the wheel, first of all, which is usually the first port of call if you're slightly off the pace. So Peter's never averse to actually pointing that out, really. So yeah, no, it's interesting. And I agree with you. I think when you think of the different varieties of car that you've got on the grid, and really you can see any one of those really having a chance up the front. I mean, Bobby Thompson's doing a good job in the Cupra, which you look at as being one of the, not one of the leading front-running cars and teams, but they're still getting good results. And he's in the lead of the Jack Sears Trophy, and he got a podium a couple of races. I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, that's probably one of the best examples of exactly how everything can equal out.
Yeah, Shaun, but we do have to hope that he doesn't do the same job at Croft as he did last time, don't we?
He did. Well, that's right. Well, I was his team boss then, wasn't I? So he was running in my Audi, and I do remember standing there looking and going, "Oh, right, okay, here we go." Right, okay.
I think we also factor in with Croft as well that while we say it was a rear-wheel drive circuit, things did change when there was some resurfacing work a few years ago. That did get rid of some of the advantage that the rear-wheel drive cars had. So that's potentially why it's a bit more open now. And I guess if you look at the stats and the facts, BMW have got most wins around Croft, but Honda are only one behind them as well. So, the Honda package is quick round there. We've seen it quick round there in the past. So we're saying it's a BMW one. It could well be, Josh Cook, who's winning races 1 and 2 and driving off into the distance.
Well, that's right. So, and also, Aidan Moffat looked a little bit quicker last weekend and got, a podium result. So that's quite a big turnaround in form. And his teammate Dexter Patterson was looking much stronger than he has in recent races. So, don't discount the Infiniti as a Laser Tools Racing as well.
I don't think you can discount a lot of teams this weekend. And of course, Aidan had such a great weekend at Croft last year. He'll take a lot of confidence, I think, from that race 3 at Alton Park. I will readily admit that when the field was lining up on the grid for that final one, I thought Stephen had a good chance of staying out front. I didn't expect Aidan to stay in second place because we'd seen flashes of pace from the car in practice, but it was only really that one session. He'd been there or thereabouts just outside the top 10, but Aidan was someone who I thought was probably going to get gobbled up in the first few laps and will drop back. So he did a good job to hold on to second place. He'll be keen to try and repeat the form that he showed last year. If he can get anywhere near that, to be fair, at Croft this weekend, I think he'd probably be quite happy. And it was good for Dexter Patterson to get that first point on the board. There were a few occasions in that race that third race, where you thought he maybe was overdriving and trying a little bit too hard when you consider the drivers that were around him. But at the end of the day, he's there like every other driver on the grid, trying to get points on the board for himself and for the team and for his sponsors. And he did a really good job against some very experienced drivers he was up against in that race.
You'll know this, Shaun, but Jake was very complimentary of Dexter's driving in that battle, wasn't he?
That's right, yeah, very. So they had a little bit of contact here and there, which is to be expected, but he was because he got stuck behind Ollie Jackson, and I'd run Ollie, so I know what Ollie does. He's like a cork in a bottle, and when he's got people behind him, he tends to stop at the apexes. And I think that then Jake got a hit up the back that hit him into Ollie Jackson, and then they scrambled past him eventually after a few laps. But no, he was really, I mean, when you think that relatively inexperienced, you know, and it's always, everybody always forgets British touring cars, the first year has got to be a learning year, because there's so much to learn, you know, about the whole, how the weekend works out and how it pans out. It's not a normal race weekend. So, you know, that you'll find a good driver. He's done a good job, you know, because we haven't seen him off in the gravel too much. You know, he hasn't been making any mistakes as far as I can remember, any big mistakes. I've probably forgotten one or two. But I'd much rather have a driver who's overdriving and driving too hard rather than someone who's not trying hard, because you can always tone that down a little bit, whereas you can rarely make them go quicker naturally. If they're naturally overdriving, you can control that a little bit. So, you know, I wouldn't be surprised to see him possibly get a podium, possibly in the, you know, reverse grid race by the end of the year. But yeah, no, it worked really well. So looking forward to, this is the tricky one. Now we're going to get everybody to have a guess of who are the race winners coming up for the weekend, which I think I was completely wrong, miles off, because I thought George Gamble might be up there, but they were a little bit off the pace, the Sicily Racing guys at the weekend, which I was surprised about. I think, actually that's completely wrong, because Adam Morgan was up there in qualifying, but then he got turned round in race 1 by Gordon, a little bit controversially. I'm not sure that was quite the right thing, but I don't get involved in that sort of stuff. Otherwise, people harangue me all the time. I'll leave that to you, Marcus. You can have an opinion on that. But you know, going to the next race. So who do you think race winners 1, 2, and 3?
Oh, that's a really. It's just I'm almost like doing the draw at the end of race 2 and just pulling a random name rather than a number out of the hat. So, no, not the hat, the bowl. But all right. I'm going to go Ash Sutton race 1 and 2.
Blimey.
Yeah,
that is out then.
So
yeah.
because there'll be a weekend where they get that Ford working perfectly,
Okay.
and
yeah.
he's not going to pass off an opportunity. And we have seen a very similar race 2s to race 1s this year. So whoever wins race 1, I think will win race 2 anyway. Race 3, let's go for. Oh, I think we need a bit of Rory Butcher love, don't we? Really?
Okay, yeah. Well, actually, Rory Butcher was run driver who I picked out as at the last one to maybe win a race and be up there, and he had a much better weekend than he has been up till now. So that was good to see.
Yeah.
Still got older view, but no, he was doing well. So, so he's another one that might do that. What about you, Matt?
Well, as Marcus has taken the Rory Butcher one that I was going to throw for race 3, I'll go a different way. I'm going to go with Jake for races 1 and 2, because he's got a decent amount of hybrid to take into qualifying that I think is going to help him. And like I say, we know that the BMW is a strong package around there, and Jake's had some good results around there in the past. So I'll go with him for races 1 and 2. I'm going to go with a Honda for race 3, but I'm going to go with Dan Rowbottom because I think Dan's shown solid pace, hasn't been rewarded for it in the season so far because he's been caught up in his fair share of incidents. I think Dan's due a result, so I'll go with Dan Rowbottom then for race 3.
Okay, well, I'm going to stick. Even though we're saying that rear-wheel drives won't be top dogs at Croft, I think, or they might not be. I think they still will be, because I think all those tight hairpins definitely help that sort of format, if you like, rear-wheel drive. So I'm going to go with Colin Turkington, Adam Morgan, and Aidan Moffat. There you go. So a rear-wheel drive flush, if you like. Yeah, so that's good. So it'll be interesting to see. But anyway, guys, thanks very much for joining us. We'll look forward to Croft. We'll be back afterwards. So, I mean, it is really going to be an exciting weekend, I think. But, I mean, the big thing is, can anybody catch Josh Cook at the minute in the championship overall? But on current form, it's going to be hard work for everybody. But thanks very much for joining us. And thanks very much for everybody watching. Make sure you download the BTCC app so you can get all the updates live over the weekend. My name's Shaun Hollamby. I'll look forward to seeing you again after Croft and seeing if any of our predictions come through. Thanks very much.